Hi. In this film, we're going to be thinking about some of the most obvious chord progressions that you can make in a minor key. And there's already a film out there that we've done talking about chord progressions in major keys that you might want to look at alongside this one. But people often worry when they're writing harmony or composing a piece about which chord would follow on best from which other chord. So maybe we're okay when we're writing cadences, we can write 5-1 and it's a perfect cadence. Maybe we can put an approach chord in, so we go 2-5-1, and we kind of get those kind of formula going. But when we're in the middle of a phrase, we're not perhaps always quite so sure about which chords really work. At the end of the day, you can write anything that sounds good, preferably that follows the rules of harmony, but if it sounds good, that's the main thing. But again, this is not meant to be exhaustive, it's just meant to be a little guidance if you are writing a chord and maybe you're not quite sure about what the best way to move on from that chord is. So always slightly more complicated in minor keys than it is in major keys, because in a minor key, chords 1 and 4 are minor, chords 5 and 6 are major, but 2 and 7 are diminished and 3 is augmented. So 3 is often quite an awkward chord in a minor key to deal with. And because 2 and 7 are diminished, they're always better used in first inversion than they are in root position. So that's not an exhaustive thing to say, because sometimes you might just want to use 2 or 7 in root position. Sometimes you might want to create a particularly dramatic effect with a chord 3, that augmented chord. But it's just to give you some kind of help and build a bit of confidence in possible progressions. So I'm not suggesting at all that a piece of music would start on chord 7B, but I am suggesting that 7B doesn't progress to many options, so it's not a bad place to start. And so 7 and 3 being the least likely chords that you're going to use, it's quite handy just to kind of explore them a little bit. Though, as I said in the film on major chord progressions, chord 7B has got more use than a lot of people give it credit for. So I'm going to work in the key of C minor, and let's think about chord 7B. So there's 7B. In the key of C minor. All right, you can see it sounds a bit ugly in root position, but in first inversion it's quite nice. Now if I want to use a chord 3, it could work very nicely after a 7B. Listen to this. So when you play chord 3, you think, my goodness, what am I going to do with this? But it's quite effective, isn't it? So you could do even things like this, a 7B onto a 3, that's a sort of appoggiatura at the top, onto a chord 1B, say. So there are things you can do, like go from a 3 over to a 1B. But 7B progressing to a 3 actually works quite nicely. If you're going to use a chord 3 and you don't know where it's going to go, because when you hear that sound, it's a little bit awkward to deal with, isn't it? You could go from 3 to 6, and that's the best progression, 3 to 6. So you can hear how that works quite nicely. So you might have something that you're really not thinking about, 7B, followed by 3, followed by 6. And it's quite an effective progression. You wouldn't want to be using those chords all the time, but it does work. But as you can see, limited possibilities for what you do after chord 3. 6 is the strongest one. You could go straight from a 7B to a chord 4, so here's 7B, and going on to a chord 4, that could work all right. You could go from your 6 to a 4, so here's 6, followed by 4. The fact that those two chords have a note in common, or 2 notes in common, makes it quite a nice smooth progression. 2 is another diminished chord, so again best used in first inversion. But if I go from a chord 6 to a chord 2B, that works quite nicely. Or I can go from a 4 to a 2B, so here's 4, and here's 2B, so that would work. I could go from a 2B to a 7B, how about that? So if I'm thinking about my chord 2B, and then to a 7B, that could work, and it could go on to 1, couldn't it? So Lots of possibilities there. What about a 2B onto 5? So 2B onto 5. That's quite nice actually, isn't it? So 2B, 5, 1 is a very common cadence progression, isn't it? 5 obviously goes to 1, but 5 obviously goes to 6. But 6 also goes to 5. And then obviously I can go 5, 1, we've talked about that. But I could go 7B to 1. So how about that? So again, it's just giving us a few suggestions for progressions that might work in minor keys. And you might want to play around with those at the keyboard or experiment writing some of those progressions. Don't see it as any kind of musical straitjacket, but if you can find that some of these progressions are helpful to you and they give you a bit of confidence writing in minor keys or improvising in minor keys, well, there it is.